The operating room froze, not because the monitors went silent, but because everyone did. Under the harsh white lights, an older woman stood motionless at the edge of the table. Surgical gloves soaked red eyes, steady as if chaos had rules only she could see. Around her, younger surgeons whispered with doubt. Too slow, too old, past her prime. Then the sound came. Not an alarm, not a shout. A distant, unmistakable thunder of rotor blades vibrating through steel and glass. Moments later, a man in uniform stepped inside, his voice low, almost reverent as he leaned toward her ear. Fallujah's ghost surgeon. No one else understood the words, but the air changed instantly, and for the first time the room realized something terrifying. They had never been in control of this surgery at all. Before the story begins, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you're drawn to stories where truth hides in silence and justice arrives unexpectedly, don't forget to subscribe. Street. Alden Medical Center had a way of announcing pressure long before anything actually went wrong. It lived in the fluorescent buzz of the corridors at 2:17 a.m., in the smell of antiseptic clinging to scrubs, in the clipped voices that grew sharper as minutes slipped away. On this particular night, the hospital felt coiled, waiting. Doctor. Evelyn Carter arrived without ceremony. She parked her aging sedan 3 levels down in the employee garage, took the stairs instead of the elevator, and entered through the side corridor most attendings avoided. Her badge was scuffed at the edges, her name etched plainly, Evelyn Carter, MD. No titles followed, no honors listed, just the basics. At 56, she moved with an economy that some mistook for stiffness. Her dark hair was tied back, neatly threaded with silver. She no longer bothered to dye. Her face bore no cosmetic softness, only lines carved by years of long nights and longer decisions. She checked the board near the trauma desk, scanned assignments, and noted without surprise that she was listed as supporting surgeon for the night's major cases. Again, across the station, a pair of residents leaned against the counter, pretending to review charts. Their voices dropped as Evelyn passed. "Did you see who they assigned?" one whispered. The other smirked. "Yeah. Guess they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel tonight." Evelyn heard them. She always did, but she didn't react. She washed her hands, tied her mask loosely around her neck, and stepped into trauma bay. 3, just as the overhead speaker crackled. Level 1 trauma en route. Male, approximately 180 pounds. Blunt force, suspected internal bleeding. ETA 4 minutes. The room snapped to life. Nurses moved with practiced urgency. Equipment was checked, rechecked. Dr. Ryan Holbrook strode in moments later, confidence radiating from every step. At 32, Holbrook was everything the hospital loved to advertise: young, brilliant, fast. He had the kind of resume that made administrators beam, and the kind of ego that required constant feeding. He barely glanced at Evelyn. "Carter," he said, already pulling on gloves. "You're assisting. I'll lead." She nodded once. Understood. As the gurney burst through the doors, the chaos became total. Blood pressure dropped. Heart rate spiked. A jagged wound along the patient's lower abdomen told only part of the story. Something deeper was wrong, something hidden. Evelyn watched silently as scans were pulled up. Her eyes traced shadows on the imaging that others skimmed past. "That's not consistent with the mechanism," she said quietly. Holbrook didn't look at her. "CT says internal bleed. We're opening him up." "The angle suggests I said we're opening," Holbrook snapped. "Time is tissue." The phrase echoed like doctrine. Residents nodded. Nurses followed orders. And just like that, the course was set. As they moved toward the operating room, Evelyn felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, not doubt, but recognition. She had seen wounds like this before. Not here. Not in clean hospitals with steady power and predictable protocols. Somewhere else. She scrubbed in without argument, her hands steady under the running water. The ore lights flared to life, bathing the room in sterile brightness. Instruments were laid out. Monitors hummed. Holbrook stood at the center, commanding attention. "Let's move fast," he said. "We don't have time for hesitation." The incision was made. Blood welled immediately, darker than expected. A nurse suctioned quickly. The numbers on the monitor flickered, dipped. Evelyn leaned closer, her gaze fixed. "Pause," she said. "That vessel, we've got it," Holbrook replied, clamping aggressively. The patient's blood pressure dropped another 10 points. Evelyn felt it then, that cold, unmistakable certainty. This wasn't a simple internal bleed. The damage followed a pattern she knew by heart, one born not of textbooks but of experience under fire. The clamp placement was wrong. Not catastrophically wrong yet, but close. "Ryan," she said, using his first name deliberately. "If you proceed like that, you'll rupture." Enough, he cut her off. "You're here to assist, not second guess." The room grew tense. A resident avoided eye contact. Another nurse glanced at Evelyn, then quickly looked away. Evelyn stepped back half a pace, hands hovering uselessly in the air. Inside her mind, memories stirred unbidden dust-choked air, the smell of cordite, a flickering headlamp illuminating torn flesh, while distant explosions shook concrete walls. She pushed the images down. This was not that place. These were not those conditions. And yet the body on the table told a familiar story. The monitor screamed, "BP's crashing." A nurse called out. Holbrook swore under his breath. Suction now. Evelyn moved without being asked, her hands precise, her motions economical. For a brief moment the bleeding slowed. The numbers stabilized barely. She leaned in again. The injury tracks deeper. "We need to approach from Holbrook," slammed his instrument down. "I don't need a lecture from someone who hasn't led a trauma case in years." The words landed harder than he realized. Evelyn froze, not outwardly but inside. Years. As if experience expired like milk. As if survival had an age limit. She met his gaze then. Calm. Unflinching. "I'm trying to keep him alive," she said simply. Holbrook looked away first. "Stick to your role," he muttered. The surgery continued, tension thick enough to taste. Outside the OR, unseen by anyone inside, a call rang through the hospital's secure line. One that bypassed standard protocols, one that made the administrator on duty straighten in his chair. A military designation flashed on the screen. "Request immediate access. Critical identification pending." Back inside the operating room, the patient's condition teetered on a knife's edge. Sweat beaded beneath masks. Minutes stretched. Evelyn felt the clock ticking not on the wall but in the body beneath her hands. And somewhere above them, beyond concrete and glass, the night air began to vibrate. The first rule of trauma surgery was never spoken aloud, but everyone in the room knew it. Once doubt crept in, it spread faster than blood loss. "Doctor." Ryan Holbrook felt it the moment the patient's systolic pressure dipped again. The monitor chirped sharply, an electronic accusation slicing through the controlled rhythm of the operating room. He tightened his jaw beneath the mask and adjusted his stance, forcing confidence into his posture, even as calculations raced through his mind. "Pressure's unstable," a nurse reported. "We're pushing fluids, but it's not holding." Holbrook nodded curtly. "We'll find the source." Evelyn Carter watched him work her eyes, following not just his hands but the consequences of every movement. She saw how the bleeding behaved, not chaotic but directional, purposeful, like it had somewhere to go. "This isn't random," she said carefully. "The damage tracks along." "I know what I'm seeing," Holbrook snapped. But he didn't. Not fully. The incision widened, retractors pulled back muscle and tissue, exposing a landscape that should have made the answer obvious. Instead, it confused him further. The bleeding wasn't where it should have been. The major vessel he expected to find compromised was intact, angry, bruised, but not ruptured. "Damn it," he muttered. "Where is it coming from?" Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Retroperitoneal. Deep. You won't see it until it's too late if you keep chasing surface flow." Holbrook hesitated. It was only a second. No one else noticed. But Evelyn did. That hesitation was the crack. "You're guessing now?" she said quietly. "Let me show you." His eyes flicked to her, sharp with warning. "I don't need." The monitor dipped again. Harder this time. "BP 60 systolic," the anesthesiologist called. "He's circling." Holbrook swore under his breath. He adjusted his approach, trying to regain control, but every move seemed to buy seconds at best. The bleeding slowed, then surged like a tide refusing to obey. Evelyn felt the weight of the room shift. The residents watched Holbrook now with something close to fear. Nurses exchanged glances they thought no one saw. She knew this moment. knew it intimately. It was the moment before everything went wrong or right, depending on who had the courage to act. "Ryan," she said again, firmer now, "you need to change your approach. Now." He looked at her, truly looked for the first time since the case began. Not at her age, not at her title, at her eyes. They were calm. That unsettled him more than anything else. "You're overstepping," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier edge. "I'm preventing a fatal error." Silence fell between them, thick and dangerous. Then the anesthesiologist spoke again. "We're losing him." Holbrook's shoulders tensed. He made a decision, not the right one, but the one his pride allowed. He pushed forward with his original plan, clamping deeper, faster, harder. Evelyn inhaled sharply. There it was. The bleeding exploded. "Rupture," someone shouted. Blood flooded the field, overwhelming suction. The monitor screamed in protest, heart rate spiking, pressure plummeting. "Clamp, clamp." Holbrook yelled, his movements suddenly frantic. Evelyn moved without thinking. Her hands were already there, pressing, controlling, buying seconds with a precision that felt almost inhuman. Muscle memory took over, the kind forged in places where mistakes meant body bags. "Angle the suction," she ordered. "Now." A nurse obeyed instantly, not even realizing she'd taken direction from someone who technically wasn't in charge. Evelyn leaned in, her voice steady. "You ruptured the secondary vessel. You have to come in from the lateral plane or you'll tear the bifurcation." Holbrook stared at the mess in front of him, panic flickering beneath his mask. "That approach, it's risky." "So is what you're doing," she replied. For a heartbeat, the room balanced on the edge of disaster. Holbrook stepped back half an inch. It wasn't a surrender, not officially. But it was enough. Evelyn took the opening. "Retractor," she said, already positioning herself. Her hands moved with deliberate, calm fingers, finding landmarks by feel more than sight. She adjusted the angle of entry, avoiding the obvious path, choosing the safer one that only experience taught. The bleeding slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. The monitor responded, numbers creeping upward just enough to give hope. Holbrook exhaled shakily. "How did you focus?" Evelyn said. Questions later. They worked together now, an uneasy truce forged in necessity. For several long minutes it seemed like they might pull it off. The vessel was secured, the field cleared, the patient's vitals stabilized into something resembling survivable. Then the anesthesiologist frowned. "We've got another drop. Different source." Evelyn's stomach tightened. She scanned the field again, her eyes narrowing. There it was, a subtle swelling almost invisible to the untrained eye. A secondary injury deeper still, one that wouldn't reveal itself until it was too late. "This injury didn't come from an accident," she said slowly. Holbrook frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The pattern," she replied. "The trajectory. This wasn't random trauma. It's consistent with—" She stopped herself. Holbrook waited, with what Evelyn straightened slightly, with controlled force, deliberate, like blast, concussive damage redirected through the body. The words hung in the air, unsettling. "That's not possible," a resident said weakly. "This was a civilian accident." Evelyn didn't respond. Her focus was elsewhere now, on the implications, on the reason this body felt so familiar under her hands. Outside the operating room, the hospital's atmosphere shifted. Security personnel received quiet instructions. Elevators were cleared. A restricted corridor was sealed off. Somewhere above the roofline, a shadow passed over the helipad lights, accompanied by a growing roar that rattled windows. Inside the OR, the sound was faint at first, a low vibration, almost imperceptible. Evelyn felt it immediately. Her hands paused for the briefest fraction of a second. Holbrook noticed. "What is it?" She didn't answer. The vibration grew stronger, a rhythmic thunder that resonated through concrete and steel. Rotor blades. The anesthesiologist looked up, confused. "Is that a helicopter?" The sound swelled, unmistakable, now drowning out even the beeping monitors. Holbrook turned toward the doors just as a red light outside the OR flicked on an alert few had ever seen used. OR3 came a voice over the intercom, tense and formal. "Stand by. You are to maintain current status. Do not conclude the procedure." Holbrook's heart pounded. Who the hell is giving orders? Evelyn stared at the closed doors, her expression unreadable. She knew that sound. She had heard it in deserts and ruined cities under skies that burned. And if they were here, then this case was never just a surgery. The rotor noise faded into the background, not because it lessened, but because everyone in operating room 3 stopped knowing what to do with it. Doctor. Ryan Holbrook stared at the sealed doors as if expecting an explanation to materialize there. Red indicators glowed above the frame restricted access command override. He had trained for emergencies, mass casualties, even active shooter protocols. This was something else entirely. Who authorized that alert, he demanded. No one answered. The anesthesiologist adjusted medication levels with trembling fingers. A nurse checked the suction again unnecessarily just to have something to do. The patient lay open on the table, chest rising and falling under mechanical breath vitals, hovering in a fragile equilibrium that felt borrowed rather than earned. Evelyn Carter returned her attention to the operative field. The deeper injury, the one that didn't belong, had begun to declare itself. Tissue swelling where it shouldn't. Micro-tears radiating outward in a pattern too clean, too directional. "This window won't last," she said calmly. "We need to address the secondary damage before the pressure builds." Holbrook swallowed. "We don't even know what caused it." "I do." He looked at her sharply. "Then say it." She hesitated. "Not from uncertainty, from caution." "Later," she replied. "Right now it doesn't matter why, only how." He bristled at the deflection, but another glance at the monitor forced him back to the present. The numbers wavered again, heart rate climbing, oxygen saturation dipping. "Proceed," he said curtly, "but make it quick." Evelyn nodded once. No triumph, no hesitation. She repositioned, choosing an approach that went against conventional teaching, but aligned perfectly with the anatomy in front of her. Her hands moved with a quiet authority, each motion deliberate, as if the steps were being recalled rather than invented. Holbrook watched unease, tightening his chest. She wasn't improvising. She was executing. "Retractor 2 inches," she said. "Suction low. Don't chase the bleed, anticipate it." A resident hesitated, then followed her instruction. The effect was immediate. The operative field cleared just enough for Evelyn to reveal the source, a hidden pocket of damage contained only by pressure and time. She worked fast now, not rushed but relentless. Stitch clamp release. Her breathing never changed. Holbrook felt something shift inside him. It wasn't admiration. Not yet. It was something more uncomfortable. Doubt. "How long have you known this approach?" he asked, unable to stop himself. Evelyn didn't look up. "Long enough." The words carried weight. Not defensiveness. Not pride. Simply fact. Outside, the OR footsteps echoed in the corridor. Heavy ones. Purposeful. They stopped just beyond the sealed doors. A voice murmured to someone on the other side, low, controlled, unmistakably military. Holbrook's stomach dropped. "Carter," he said, lowering his voice. "Do you know what's happening?" "Yes." He stared at her. "Then why aren't you saying anything?" "Because if I say it now," she replied evenly, "you'll stop listening to the patient and start listening to your fear." The truth of it struck harder than any insult. Before he could respond, the intercom crackled again. Or 3, the same voice said, "Be advised, a high-ranking officer is on site. Maintain sterility. Continue procedure until instructed otherwise." Holbrook snapped. "This is a hospital, not a base. They can't just—" "They can," Evelyn said quietly. "And they will." He searched her face for some sign of exaggeration. Found none. The surgery pressed on, minutes stretching into an eternity measured in blood loss and sutures. Slowly, painstakingly, the patient stabilized. Not safe. Not yet. But alive. Then the complication hit. Pressure spike. The anesthesiologist called out. "Intracranial signs, this is secondary shock." Evelyn closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. "There it is." Holbrook felt panic rise. "We didn't even touch. You couldn't have," she said. "It was already there." She explained as she worked, her words clipped but precise. The injury had sent a shockwave through the body, causing cascading failures that no standard trauma protocol would anticipate. It was the kind of damage caused by forces designed to break bodies efficiently. "Explosive concussive transfer," she said. "Non-linear. It hides." The room went quiet. "You're saying this man was exposed to?" Holbrook began. "Yes, that's impossible," a resident whispered. "This is a civilian hospital." Evelyn met his eyes. "Bodies don't care where they are. Damage tells the truth." The patient's vitals wavered again, threatening to slip. Holbrook felt something inside him finally crack, not his confidence but his resistance. "What do you need?" Evelyn named instruments without pause. Adjustments, medications, a sequence so specific it felt like choreography. They followed her lead. Outside, the door locks disengaged with a soft hiss. Every head turned. The doors opened just wide enough for a single figure to step inside, flanked by security who remained respectfully out of the sterile field. The man wore a dress uniform immaculate, adorned with insignia that made even seasoned hospital administrators straighten reflexively. A general. He didn't look at the monitors, didn't address Holbrook. His eyes went straight to Evelyn. Recognition passed between them, hers guarded his unmistakable. He stepped closer, stopping just short of the sterile boundary. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Doctor." Evelyn didn't look up. "Sir." The title alone sent a ripple through the room. Holbrook's mouth went dry. The general leaned in, lowering his voice further, the words meant only for her. "We've been looking for you for a long time." Her hands never faltered. "I told them I was done." "You were never done," he replied. "Not after Fallujah." The name landed like a dropped scalpel. Holbrook felt the blood drain from his face. "Fallujah." The general's gaze hardened as he watched Evelyn work. "We need you," he said. "This patient, he crossed paths with something that shouldn't exist outside a war zone, and you're the only one who's seen it before." Evelyn finished the final maneuver and stepped back, allowing the team to secure the field. Only then did she look at him. "I'm here to save a life," she said. "Nothing else." The general nodded. "That's why we're here." Holbrook stood frozen, the pieces finally slamming together in his mind, the technique, the calm, the unshakable certainty. He had dismissed her as past her prime. He had been catastrophically wrong. And the surgery wasn't over yet. The word Fallujah lingered in the operating room long after it was spoken, heavy and radioactive, altering the gravity of everything around it. No one said it aloud again, but everyone felt its weight. It was not a place that belonged in a civilian hospital under clean lights and climate-controlled air. It was a name associated with grainy footage, classified briefings, and casualties that never made headlines. Dr. Ryan Holbrook felt his pulse in his throat. He looked from the general to Evelyn Carter, and back again, his mind scrambling to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew. The woman he had dismissed as outdated now stood at the center of a gravity well that pulled in military authority, locked doors and words spoken in whispers. Sir Holbrook began forcing professionalism into his voice. "This is my operating room." The general's eyes flicked toward him for the first time. They were calm, assessing, utterly unimpressed. "Doctor," he said, "right now this is a battlefield casualty in everything but geography." Holbrook stiffened. "With respect, we're following civilian protocol." Evelyn spoke before the tension could escalate. "Protocol will fail him," she said evenly. "We're past that point." She gestured to the monitors where numbers hovered just above collapse. The patient was alive, but only because they were borrowing time from a system that didn't understand what it was fighting. The general nodded once. "Then do what you do best." Holbrook bristled. "And what exactly is that?" Evelyn met his gaze. There was no anger there, no satisfaction, only a quiet, immovable certainty. "Survive the impossible," she said. She turned back to the table. The next phase of the surgery demanded absolute precision. The secondary trauma, shockwave-induced microfractures and internal shear damage had begun to trigger cascading failures. Evelyn recognized the signs instantly. Subtle tissue discoloration, pressure shifts that defied normal logic. The kind of injuries that fooled even experienced surgeons until the patient crashed without warning. She had seen it before. In places where the air itself became a weapon, "Administer mannitol," she instructed. "Now, adjust ventilation, lower pressure, increase oxygen fraction." "We're walking a line." The anesthesiologist hesitated only a fraction of a second before complying. The authority in Evelyn's voice cut through hierarchy like a blade. Holbrook watched stunned as the room reoriented around her. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand control. She simply took it, and the team followed because it made sense to do so. "How do you know this will work?" he asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Evelyn didn't look at him. "Because it already has." Dozens of times. The words sent a chill through him. The general remained silent, observing. His presence alone kept hospital administrators at bay, their protests muffled behind sealed doors and layers of authority they couldn't penetrate. Whatever this was, it was bigger than liability forms and review boards. Minutes passed, then more. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the patient's vitals began to stabilize. Not spike, not normalize. Stabilize. The kind of fragile balance that felt like holding breath underwater, knowing that surfacing too fast would kill you. A nurse let out a shaky exhale she hadn't realized she was holding. Holbrook felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Relief, yes, but also humility. The realization that his training, his accolades, his spotless record had not prepared him for this. Not truly. Evelyn stepped back slightly, allowing the team to secure the work she had done. Blood loss was controlled. Pressure managed. The immediate crisis, at least this one, was over. But she didn't relax. Her eyes were distant now, focused inward as if listening to something no one else could hear. "This isn't over," she said quietly. The general inclined his head. "We know." Holbrook turned sharply. Know what Evelyn finally faced him fully. "This injury didn't come from an accident," she said. "And it didn't come alone." Holbrook shook his head. "You're saying this man was exposed to military grade?" "Yes," she interrupted. "And whoever did it didn't intend for him to reach a hospital. He survived something he shouldn't have." The implication settled like ice in Holbrook's veins. "Then why here?" he asked. "Because bodies don't follow plans," Evelyn replied. "And sometimes the wrong person lives long enough to reveal the truth." Outside the oar, the general spoke quietly into a secure device, his words clipped and coded. He glanced at Evelyn again, something like respect earned, not assumed, softening his expression. "You disappeared after Fallujah," he said when he finished. "No debrief, no commendations, just gone." Evelyn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I did my part. You saved hundreds. I did my job," she corrected. "And I paid for it." Holbrook caught the edge in her voice, the faint tremor beneath the calm. For the first time he saw not just competence but cost. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, steady now but once stained with more than blood. "War doesn't end when you leave it," she said finally. "It follows you home. Some of us learn how to hide from it better than others." The monitors beeped steadily, a fragile rhythm of life reclaimed. A nurse broke the silence. "Vitals are holding." Evelyn nodded. "Good. Prep him for ICU. He'll need close monitoring for the next 48 hours. If he spikes, call me. Not the board. Me." Holbrook opened his mouth to object, then closed it. "Yes, doctor," he said instead. The words tasted different now. Not condescending, not polite, earned. As the team began closing, the general stepped closer to Evelyn, lowering his voice again. "There will be questions," he said. "From people who don't like secrets." "There always are," she replied. "You may need protection." She met his gaze, something almost wry flickering there. "I've managed without it so far." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll talk later." Evelyn didn't respond. She was already mentally elsewhere, running through contingencies, anticipating complications, refusing to trust the fragile calm. Holbrook watched her. As the surgery concluded, the room slowly exhaling as crisis gave way to exhaustion. He felt changed, though he couldn't yet name how. The certainty he had walked in with was gone, replaced by something less comfortable but far more honest. Respect. As the patient was wheeled out toward the ICU, Evelyn peeled off her gloves and stepped back, blending once more into the background she seemed to prefer. But the room would not forget what it had seen, and neither would Holbrook. Because somewhere deep inside him a new realization took root. This hospital had underestimated the wrong person, and whatever had followed that patient here hadn't finished revealing itself. The ICU doors slid shut behind the gurney, with a soft hydraulic hiss, sealing the patient inside a cocoon of machines and watchful eyes. For a moment, the hallway outside felt unreal, too quiet, too clean, like a stage after the actors had left, but the tension refused to follow. "Doctor." Evelyn Carter stood just outside the glass, arms folded loosely, watching the monitors settle into a cautious rhythm. The numbers weren't good, but they were possible, and sometimes possible was everything. Dr. Ryan Holbrook lingered a few feet away, unsure where to stand now that the rules he'd relied on all night had been quietly rewritten. His scrubs were damp with sweat, his hands trembling just enough to annoy him. He had survived the surgery, yes, but something else had been cut open in the process. The general emerged from a side corridor flanked by two men who did not wear uniforms but moved like they belonged to one. He dismissed them with a subtle gesture and approached Evelyn alone. "You bought him time," he said. "I bought him a chance," she corrected. "Time depends on what happens next." "We're securing the floor," the general continued. "No visitors, no press. His name won't appear on any public registry." Holbrook stiffened. "That's not standard." The general turned to him calmly. Neither was tonight. Holbrook swallowed whatever protest he'd been preparing. He looked back at Evelyn, searching her face for confirmation, permission, something. She gave none. "He needs a CT in 6 hours," she said. "If the edema spreads, you'll see it before the monitors do. Don't wait for permission." The general nodded. "Already arranged." That caught Holbrook's attention. Arranged how quietly, the general replied. A hospital administrator hurried down the corridor, then breathless face tight with forced politeness. "General, with all due respect, this is a civilian facility. We have procedures, liability concerns, boards to notify." The general didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Your procedures nearly killed that man," he said, "and your boards will be notified when they're allowed to be." The administrator flushed. "You can't just take over a hospital." "I'm not," the general said evenly. "I'm protecting an asset." Evelyn turned slowly. "He's a patient," she said, "not an asset." The general met her gaze, something like apology flickering there. "Tonight he's both." Silence stretched. Then Evelyn nodded once, not agreement, but acceptance of reality. She'd lived long enough to know when lines blurred beyond arguing. Holbrook watched the exchange, a strange sensation creeping in. He was no longer the most informed person in the room, not even close. "Dr. Carter," the administrator said, redirecting, "we'll need a full report." "Your involvement tonight, my involvement saved a life," Evelyn replied calmly. "Everything else is paperwork." The administrator bristled. "That's not how this works." "It is when it does," she said, then turned away. She walked down the corridor toward the staff locker room, the general falling into step beside her. Their strides matched effortlessly as if they'd walked like this before. "You should have stayed gone," he said quietly. "So should you," she replied. He allowed himself a faint smile. "You know that wasn't an option." "No," she said. "I know." They stopped near a window overlooking the helipad. The night air beyond the glass still shimmered with heat from the recent landing. Red lights blinked steadily, indifferent to human drama. "They'll come asking," the general said. "Questions you won't want to answer. They always do." And when they do, Evelyn's reflection stared back at her from the glass, older yes, but unbowed. "I'll tell them the truth." That's usually what scares them most. Behind them, Holbrook hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Dr. Carter." She turned. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words clearly costing him something. "For dismissing you. For not listening." She studied him for a long moment. "Apologies don't save patients," she said. "Learning does." He nodded. Then, "Teach me." Something softened in her eyes, not warmth exactly, but recognition. "Tonight was a lesson," she said. "Whether you keep it is up to you." A nurse approached, voice low. "Dr. ICU reports intracranial pressure holding. For now." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Good. Call me if that changes." As she turned to leave, the general spoke again. "There's something else you should know." She paused. "The patient wasn't just exposed to a weapon," he said. "He was trying to stop it from being sold." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "Of course, someone didn't want him alive," the general continued. "And now they know he is." Evelyn opened her eyes. "Then you'd better make sure they don't get a second chance. We're working on it." She faced him fully. "This ends one of two ways," she said, "either quietly or with collateral damage." He inclined his head. "I was hoping you'd help us avoid the latter." Her expression hardened. "I help patients. That's all." "That's more than enough," he said. They parted, then the general back into shadows and secured corridors. Evelyn toward the locker room, her shoulders heavy with a weight she'd hoped never to feel again. Holbrook remained where he was watching her go. The hospital around him felt different now, smaller, thinner, like a stage set peeled back to reveal something darker underneath. He realized with a mix of awe and unease that the night's drama had not been an anomaly. It had been an introduction. Somewhere deep within the ICU, machines hummed steadily, holding a man between worlds. Outside, forces unseen repositioned themselves, adjusting plans that had gone wrong. And Dr. Evelyn Carter, once written off as past her prime, stepped into the shadows with the quiet certainty of someone who knew this was far from over. Because battles didn't always end in war zones. Sometimes they followed you home and waited. The ICU at Street Alden never truly slept. Even at 3 in the morning it breathed soft alarms rising and falling, ventilators whispering, fluorescent lights dimmed just enough to pretend it was night. Behind the glass of bed 7, the patient lay suspended between life and whatever waited beyond the machines. Tubes traced a careful map across his body. Numbers glowed steady, then wavered, then steadied again. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped behind her back. She watched without blinking. ICP's holding at 20, the night intensivist said quietly. "That's better than expected." "Better isn't safe," Evelyn replied. "Not yet." She leaned in, studying the subtle signs others missed, the way the patient's jaw tightened despite sedation, the faint asymmetry in his pupils that came and went like a shadow. The body was still fighting something deeper than trauma. Holbrook hovered near the doorway, unsure whether he belonged here. He felt like a guest in someone else's war. "You're expecting another crash," he said softly. Evelyn didn't look at him. "I'm expecting the truth to surface." Before he could ask what she meant, the lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. It was minor, probably nothing. But Evelyn's posture changed instantly. She straightened. "Get me the latest labs. And call radiology, tell them I want eyes on the scan the moment it's done." Holbrook moved without question. Outside the ICU, footsteps approached with purpose. The general appeared again, this time alone, his expression tighter than before. He stopped just short of the glass eyes fixed on the patient. "We've confirmed his identity," he said. "Name's Daniel Mercer." Evelyn nodded. "What was he doing? Trying to expose a transfer? Components meant to disappear off the books. He intercepted the wrong shipment and paid for it." "Yes." Holbrook returned with a tablet, handing it to Evelyn. "Labs are trending. Strange. Electrolytes don't match the injury profile." Evelyn scanned the data, jaw tightening. "Because the injury isn't the only problem." She looked at the general. "What exactly was he exposed to?" The general hesitated. "We don't have the full picture yet." Evelyn's eyes lifted sharp. "You brought Fallujah into my operating room." "Don't insult me now." The general exhaled slowly. "Directed concussive tech. Experimental. Designed to incapacitate without leaving obvious external wounds. Designed to kill quietly," Evelyn said. "Sometimes," he admitted. The monitor beeped louder. BP's dropping, the intensivist called out. "ICP's climbing 28 and rising." Evelyn moved instantly. "Prep for emergency decompression. Now." Holbrook froze. "Here, in the ICU, we don't have time to move him," she said. "If that pressure spikes again, he'll herniate before we reach the OR." The intensivist hesitated. "That's a high-risk call." "So is doing nothing," Evelyn replied. The general stepped closer. "What do you need?" "Space," she said. And silence. Orders flew. Curtains were drawn. Equipment rolled in. The ICU transformed edges, blurring into something raw, closer to a field station than a hospital unit. Holbrook found himself scrubbing in again, heart pounding. "You've done this before," he said, half statement, half question. Evelyn glanced at him. "Not like this." That was the closest she came to a confession. As they worked, the pressure spiked again. Alarms screamed. The patient's body arched, despite sedation betraying the violence happening inside his skull. "Hold him steady," Evelyn ordered. Her hands were precise movements, stripped down to essentials. She cut, drilled, relieved pressure with a speed that bordered on impossible. Blood pooled, then slowed. The monitor responded grudgingly. 26, 24, 22. A collective breath was released. Holbrook realized he was shaking. They finished the procedure in silence. When it was done, the patient lay still, fragile but alive. The room felt hollowed out, like something sacred had passed through and left its mark. Evelyn stepped back, peeling off gloves. For a moment, she closed her eyes. The general watched her carefully. "That technique," he said. "You didn't learn it stateside." "No," she replied. "I learned it where mistakes didn't get second chances." He nodded. "Fallujah." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "Don't say it like it's a badge." He looked away. Holbrook broke the silence. "Why did you disappear?" he asked. "After everything you did." Evelyn considered him for a long moment. "Because survival has a cost," she said, "and I'd paid enough." The patient's vitals stabilized further, the crisis receding like a tide. But outside the glass, Evelyn sensed movement plans, shifting consequences aligning. A nurse approached quietly. "Doctor, there's someone asking for you. Who hospital board?" And federal representatives. Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Tell them I'm busy." The nurse hesitated. "They said it's urgent." Evelyn nodded once. "Then they can wait urgently." The general allowed himself the faintest smile. Holbrook watched her, a realization settling deep in his chest. This wasn't just about skill or experience. It was about resolve, the kind forged when the world teaches you exactly how fragile life is, then dares you to protect it anyway. As dawn crept toward the horizon, painting the ICU windows with the faintest gray, the machines continued their quiet vigil. Daniel Mercer remained alive. For now, Evelyn stood at the glass, arms folded, eyes distant. She knew better than anyone that the hardest part didn't come with alarms or blood. It came after. When the questions started, morning arrived without warmth. It crept into street, Alden Medical Center, as a pale, reluctant light filtering through high ICU windows and revealing what the night had tried to hide. Exhaustion etched into faces, dried blood on shoes, the quiet aftermath of decisions that could not be undone. Dr. Evelyn Carter hadn't moved from her post. She stood at the glass of bed 7 coffee untouched on the counter behind her eyes, tracking the subtle rise and fall of Daniel Mercer's chest. The emergency decompression had bought them time, real time this time, but time was a currency that spent itself, whether you watched it or not. ICP is stable, the day intensivist reported, scanning the chart. Still elevated but trending down. Evelyn nodded. "It'll fluctuate. Watch the pupils. If they lag, call me immediately." "Yes, ma'am." The title slipped out naturally. No one corrected it. Across the unit, a pair of men in dark suits spoke quietly with hospital security. Their presence drew glances, federal no doubt. They moved like men accustomed to rooms changing shape around them. Doors opened faster. Voices lowered. Holbrook approached Evelyn cautiously, as if she might vanish if startled. "They're here," he said. "I know. They're asking questions. They always do." He hesitated. "About you." Evelyn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "About the patient. They're very interested in your history." She finally turned to face him. "Are you?" Holbrook met her gaze. "Yes," he admitted, "but not for the reasons they are." Before she could respond, the general appeared at the end of the unit, his expression grim. He dismissed the suited men with a gesture and approached Evelyn directly. "They've escalated," he said quietly. "This morning's procedure triggered flags in places we don't control." Evelyn folded her arms. "You never do. They want a debrief. Formal." She laughed once, humorless. "I'm not on active duty." "No," he agreed. "But you were." The words settled heavily between them. Holbrook looked from one to the other. "You were military." Evelyn didn't answer him. Her attention was fixed on the general. "I was a surgeon," she said. "That's all I've ever been." And in Fallujah, the general replied, "You were more than that." The name hung there again, dangerous as a live wire. Evelyn turned away, staring back at the patient. "I kept people alive long enough for someone else to decide their fate," she said. "That doesn't make me a legend. It makes me tired." The general softened. "You were called the Ghost because no one ever saw you fail." Evelyn's voice dropped. They didn't see who didn't make it off the table. A silence followed, thick, respectful. A nurse approached hesitantly. "Dr. Carter," the board insists. "They're threatening suspension pending review." Holbrook stiffened. "That's ridiculous." She saved his life. The nurse nodded apologetically. Politics don't bleed, doctor. Evelyn sighed, finally stepping away from the glass. Fine, she said. I'll talk. They moved to a small conference room just off the ICU. Frosted glass walls, neutral tones designed to feel safe, controlled. It didn't. The suited men were already seated. One introduced himself as federal oversight. Another didn't bother. We appreciate your cooperation, the first said smoothly. Given the irregularities of last night, we have concerns. Evelyn sat without invitation. Concerns don't save lives. The man smiled thinly. Neither do ghosts. The word struck harder than intended. Holbrook felt his stomach drop. The general's posture stiffened. Watch your tone. We're just trying to understand, the man continued. Doctor Carter, your record shows an abrupt departure from a classified program 15 years ago. No debrief. No exit documentation. Then you resurface here performing techniques not taught in civilian medicine on a patient involved in a federal investigation. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. You're asking why I left. We're asking why you're here. She met his eyes, unblinking. Because someone was dying. That's not sufficient. It's the only answer that matters. The second man finally spoke. You're aware that your actions may compromise an ongoing operation. Evelyn tilted her head. I'm aware that your operation nearly killed a man. The room went quiet. Holbrook watched, heart pounding. This wasn't a surgeon under review. This was a witness refusing to be intimidated. You disappeared, the first man said. People don't just disappear from programs like that. They do when the program disappears first, Evelyn replied. The general shifted. That's enough. Evelyn raised a hand, stopping him. No, let them ask. She turned back to the men. Fallujah wasn't a chapter. It was a wound. I operated in basements with no anesthesia, no backup, and no names. When it ended, you packed up your data and left the bodies behind. I stayed long enough to bury what I could. Then I came home and tried to be a doctor again. The men exchanged glances, and now one asked. Now she said quietly, you brought it back into my operating room. A tense beat passed. Outside, an alarm sounded soft but urgent. Holbrook stood. ICU. They rushed back to bed 7. Daniel Mercer's vitals were shifting again, not crashing but changing. The monitor traced a new pattern, unfamiliar and unsettling. Pupils are sluggish, the intensivist said. ICP creeping up. Evelyn was already moving. Prep hypertonic saline. Now, as the team responded, the federal men hovered uselessly at the edge, suddenly aware of how little authority meant when a body decided otherwise. The general watched Evelyn take control again, seamless and absolute. He leaned toward one of the men. This is why you don't threaten her. Slowly, the numbers stabilized once more. Evelyn exhaled, shoulders finally sagging a fraction. Daniel Mercer lived. For now. She stepped back, exhaustion finally breaking through the armor. Holbrook caught her elbow, instinctively steadying her. Thank you, he said quietly, for trusting me. She met his eyes. Earn it. As the crisis passed, the federal men retreated, their questions unanswered, their control diminished. The general remained watching Evelyn with something like reverence. You're not invisible anymore, he said softly. Evelyn looked back at the patient, then at the waking hospital around her. I never was, she replied. People just stopped looking. And as daylight claimed the ICU, one truth became impossible to ignore. The ghost of Fallujah had never vanished. She had simply been waiting. By Mid-Morning Street, Alden Medical Center no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a pressure chamber, walls holding back forces that wanted in protocols stretched thin by authority that didn't wear badges anyone recognized. Phones rang and stopped ringing. Elevators paused on locked floors. Security posted themselves at intersections they didn't usually guard. Inside the ICU, the atmosphere sharpened. Daniel Mercer's condition stabilized just enough to lull the unwary into hope, just enough to be dangerous. Dr. Evelyn Carter knew better. She stood at the foot of the bed, studying the newest imaging as it loaded on the screen. The scan revealed what she had feared but hoped not to see: diffuse swelling that didn't follow predictable pathways, faint striations across deep tissue like fingerprints left by a force that had passed through rather than struck. This isn't resolving, Holbrook said quietly. No, Evelyn replied. It's organizing. Organizing into what? Into failure, she said. Unless we interrupt it. The intensivist frowned. We've already done decompression. We're maxed on medical management. Evelyn nodded. Then medicine isn't enough. Holbrook felt his pulse quicken. You're talking about going back in? Yes. In the ICU. No, she said. In the OR. Now. The intensivist hesitated. Transporting him could trigger. Leaving him here will guarantee it, Evelyn cut in. The swelling is directional. It's following the injury vector. If it reaches the brainstem. She didn't finish the sentence. The general stepped closer. How long do we have? Minutes, Evelyn said. Maybe less. The ICU erupted into motion. As they prepared for transport, Holbrook caught up to Evelyn at the head of the bed. You're sure? She met his gaze. I've never been more sure. The gurney moved fast through cleared corridors, security doors opening in sequence, as if the building itself had been prepped for this moment. The OR lights flared to life before they arrived. Instruments already laid out, no questions asked, no committees consulted. This time no one argued about who would lead. Evelyn took her place at the center without ceremony. Holbrook stood beside her, silent alert, ready. As anesthesia deepened, the monitor dipped sharply. Pressure's spiking, the anesthesiologist warned. We're losing the window. Evelyn didn't respond. She was already cutting. Her movements were faster now, stripped of anything unnecessary. She navigated tissue like a map she had memorized long ago, bypassing obvious landmarks to reach the real threat, deep hidden waiting. There, she said. You see it, Holbrook leaned in. He saw it now, subtle but unmistakable. A compressed region pushing against critical structures, the aftermath of a force designed to disrupt without leaving clean lines. How did you know, he asked. I've watched it kill before, she replied. Not today. She adjusted her angle, entering from a path no textbook recommended. It was risky. It was brilliant. And it was the only option. The room held its breath. Pressure dropping, the anesthesiologist said. Slowly. Evelyn worked with relentless focus hands, steady despite the stakes. Sweat traced the line of her temple, but her eyes never left the field. She corrected microbleeds before they announced themselves, anticipating failure before it formed. Holbrook followed her lead instinctively, now no longer questioning, no longer resisting. He understood something fundamental in this moment. This wasn't about authority. It was about stewardship. A sudden tremor ran through the patient's body. Arrhythmia, a nurse shouted. Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. Hold! Don't chase it! The monitor stuttered, then stabilized. Seconds stretched into something like eternity. Then finally the numbers shifted decisively in their favor. Pressure normalized. Oxygenation improved. The body stopped fighting. A long collective exhale filled the room. Evelyn completed the final step and stepped back. It's done, she said quietly. No one cheered. No one spoke. The silence felt earned. The general stood at the edge of the sterile field, eyes fixed on the patient. You pulled him back, he said. Evelyn shook her head. He stayed. As the team began closing and preparing for recovery, Holbrook felt a surge of emotion he didn't quite understand. Relief, awe, and something like shame braided together. He looked at Evelyn. They were wrong about you. She glanced at him. Who's they? Everyone, he admitted, including me. She considered that, then nodded once. Good. Outside, the OR word spread quickly but not publicly. The federal representatives withdrew their leverage, weakened by the simple fact of survival. The general made a quiet call, his tone different now, less urgent, more resolved. As the patient was wheeled back toward the ICU, Evelyn lingered a moment, hands resting on the edge of the table. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind the familiar ache in her bones, the cost of remembering how to be this person again. Holbrook approached hesitantly. What happens now? Evelyn looked toward the doors where daylight filtered in. Now he heals, she said, and the truth has a chance. And you, she met his gaze, something unreadable passing through her eyes. I go back to being a surgeon, she said. The rest is noise. The general joined them. There will be consequences, he said, for people who thought this could be buried. Evelyn nodded. There always are. He studied her. You don't want recognition. No. Protection. She thought of the past of rooms lit by headlamps and decisions made with lives balanced on her hands. I've lived without it. He inclined his head. Then we'll make sure no one interferes. As they parted, the hospital slowly resumed its rhythm. Alarms softened, doors unlocked. Staff returned to routines that now felt slightly altered, as if the building remembered what had passed through it. In the ICU, Daniel Mercer's vitals held steady. Alive, Holbrook stood at the glass watching the machines trace life where death had nearly claimed it. He understood now that legends didn't announce themselves. They worked quietly, decisively, and left others to argue about titles. Behind him, Evelyn Carter walked away from the OR shoulders, squared steps measured. The ghost of Fallujah faded back into the background, but the impact of her presence would not. The first night after the second surgery passed without alarms, and that alone felt unnatural. Street, Alden Medical Center settled into a cautious rhythm, as if the building itself were afraid to breathe too loudly. The ICU lights dimmed. Hallway conversations dropped to murmurs. Even the machines around Daniel Mercer seemed to hum more softly, their steady cadence, a fragile promise rather than a guarantee. Doctor, Evelyn Carter sat in a chair pulled close to the glass jacket draped over her shoulders, eyes never straying far from the monitors. She had not gone home. She rarely did after nights like this. Holbrook joined her just after midnight, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He set one beside her without comment. "Vitals have held for 6 hours," he said quietly. "That's better than I expected." Evelyn nodded. "It's the calm after the impact. The body's deciding what it can live with." Holbrook studied the patient through the glass. "And if it decides it can't, then it tells us," she replied. "Bodies are honest that way." They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere down the hall, a call bell chimed and was answered. Life continued mundane, indifferent, relentless. "You know," Holbrook said, "eventually the board backed off." Evelyn didn't react, temporarily. "They were encouraged," he added carefully. She allowed herself a faint smile. "That's the kind of language power uses when it wants to pretend it's polite." Holbrook hesitated. They were also told to review last night's decisions. Protocol adherence. Chain of command. "Good," Evelyn said. "They should. You're not worried," she turned to him then. "About being punished for saving a life," he nodded. "No," she said. "I'm worried about what happens if people stop doing that." The monitor chirped softly, drawing their attention back to the bed. Daniel Mercer's heart rate dipped, then steadied. His breathing remained assisted but strong. Evelyn leaned forward, eyes narrowing. See that Holbrook followed her gaze. Subtle deceleration. "He's coming out," she said. Slowly. A nurse approached, voice low. "Doctor, his sedation requirements are decreasing." Evelyn stood. "Good. Don't rush it. Let him surface on his own." As if summoned by her words, the general appeared again at the end of the unit. This time he looked tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying consequences rather than fighting battles. "He made it through the window," he said. "For now," Evelyn replied. "That's all anyone ever gets." The general nodded. "The people responsible for what happened to him will face consequences," Evelyn finished. "Or they won't. Either way, that's not my work." He studied her. "You could have been more." She met his gaze, evenly. "I was enough." He accepted that finally. As dawn approached, a change rippled through the ICU. Daniel Mercer's fingers twitched. Once, then again. "Doctor," the nurse whispered urgently. Evelyn stepped closer to the bed. "Daniel," she said quietly, her voice steady. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." For a moment, nothing happened. Then pressure. Weak, uncertain, real. Holbrook felt his breath catch. Evelyn didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply nodded as if the outcome had been negotiated rather than won. "He's here," she said. "Welcome back." Over the next hours, Daniel surfaced inch by inch. Confusion, pain, awareness. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused, then closed again. But each time he came back a little stronger. When he was lucid enough to speak, the general was ushered into the room, standing at a respectful distance. Evelyn remained at the bedside, a quiet anchor. "They tried to kill you," she told Daniel gently. "But they failed." Daniel swallowed, his voice hoarse. "I know." The general stiffened. "You remember enough," Daniel said. Enough to know why I'm here. Evelyn watched his vitals as he spoke, noting the stress response. Save your strength, she said. The truth can wait. Daniel's eyes flicked to her. You're the one, he whispered. She didn't ask what he meant. The ghost, he continued faintly. They said, if anyone could fix me, it'd be you. Holbrook froze. Evelyn's expression didn't change. They say a lot of things, she replied. Rest. Daniel's hand tightened weakly around hers. Thank you. She squeezed back once, then gently disengaged. Outside the room, the general exhaled heavily. Word will spread. It always does, Evelyn said. Just never the whole story. As the day staff arrived and the hospital resumed its normal pace, a subtle shift lingered. People looked at Evelyn differently now, not with awe, not with fear, but with something quieter, respect. Holbrook caught her near the locker room as she finally prepared to leave. You could have everything, he said. Recognition, authority, a department named after you. She paused, considering him. Those things don't make you matter, she said. What you do when no one's watching does. He nodded slowly. As Evelyn stepped out into the morning air, the sun rose fully at last, bathing the hospital in light that felt almost undeserved. She breathed it in shoulders, relaxing for the first time in days. Behind her, Daniel Mercer lived. The truth moved closer to daylight, and a system that had underestimated her began quietly to correct itself. Not because a legend demanded it, but because a surgeon had done her job. The investigation did not arrive with sirens or subpoenas. It came quietly, the way serious consequences always did, through emails marked confidential meetings scheduled without agendas, and people who suddenly found reasons to avoid eye contact in hallways they had walked for years. By the third day after Daniel Mercer regained consciousness, Street, Alden Medical Center felt different again, not tense like before, watchful. Dr. Evelyn Carter noticed it immediately. She noticed the way administrators lowered their voices when she passed, the way security officers nodded instead of blocking her path, the way a laminated memo appeared on the staff board announcing a temporary review of trauma decision-making protocols carefully worded to assign blame without naming names. Holbrook read it twice, jaw tight. They're circling, he said quietly, walking beside her toward the ICU, trying to decide who to sacrifice. Evelyn didn't slow. They always start that way. Daniel Mercer was awake now, propped carefully in bed, eyes clearer each hour. His voice remained weak, but his mind was sharp, dangerously so. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing every detail with the focus of a man who knew time was no longer a luxury. When Evelyn entered the room, he gave a faint smile. You look like someone who expects trouble. She checked his pupils, adjusted a line. I expect people. That's worse, he said. The general stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the corridor outside. He's not wrong, he said. Things are moving. Daniel shifted slightly, wincing. Then let them move, he said. I didn't survive all that to stay quiet. Evelyn met his gaze. You survived because your body endured something it shouldn't have, she said. Talking too soon could undo that. Daniel nodded. I know. But when I'm ready, I'm talking. The general inclined his head. We'll make sure you're heard. Outside the room, the hospital board convened behind closed doors. Holbrook was summoned halfway through his rounds, his hands still smelling faintly of antiseptic. He sat at the long table, aware that his presence there meant one thing: they were deciding which version of the story would become official. We have concerns, the chairwoman began, fingers steepled. About last week's deviation from established protocol. Holbrook held his ground. The deviation saved a life. According to Dr. Carter. According to the patient, he replied. According to the monitors. According to reality. Murmurs rippled through the room. And yet another board member said, Dr. Carter acted without formal authority. Holbrook leaned forward. Authority didn't stop the bleeding. The chairwoman frowned. Be careful, Doctor. Holbrook didn't flinch. With respect, ma'am, I already was. That's why he nearly died. Silence followed. The board dismissed him shortly after, no resolution reached, but something had shifted. The usual certainty was gone, replaced by something brittle. When Holbrook returned to the ICU, he found Evelyn standing at the glass again, arms folded, watching Daniel sleep. They're looking for a scapegoat, he said. Evelyn nodded. They always are. And they won't find one here, she said. Not this time. He studied her. How are you so sure? Before she could answer, the general approached, expression unreadable. Because they've lost control of the narrative. He handed Evelyn a slim folder. What's this? She asked. Statements, he said. From people who were there. From people who weren't supposed to talk. She flipped through it briefly. Nurses, residents, anesthesiology staff. Clear accounts. Consistent. Honest. They spoke up, Holbrook said, disbelief in his voice. They watched you save a man everyone else had written off, the general replied. That changes things. Evelyn closed the folder. Truth has weight, she said. People forget that. Later that afternoon, Daniel Mercer asked to speak privately. When the room cleared, he looked at Evelyn steadily. They tried to bury this, he said. The tech, the transfer, me. I know, she replied. I have names, he continued. Roots, dates, proof. She studied him carefully. And you think I want it. I think you understand it, he said. What it costs to stay silent. The words landed harder than he intended. Evelyn sat down slowly. I stayed silent because I was tired of watching truth turn into theater, she said. Because every time it came out, someone else paid. Daniel nodded. This time they won't. She held his gaze for a long moment. You're wrong, she said gently. Someone always pays. The question is whether it's worth it. It is, he said, without hesitation. The general returned before she could respond. We've confirmed, he said. Internal oversight is taking the case. Not the hospital, not the board. Holbrook exhaled in relief. So that's it for Street Alden, the general said. Yes. And for Dr. Carter, Holbrook asked. The general met Evelyn's eyes. That depends on what she wants. Evelyn considered the question not for long, but honestly. She thought of Fallujah, of basements and blood and hands that never stopped shaking, of coming home and being told her experience was inconvenient, obsolete. I want to keep working, she said, without interference. The general nodded. Done. And I don't want my name used to decorate anyone's apology. Also done. Holbrook smiled faintly. You could teach, he said. You already are. Evelyn looked at him. Then learn, she replied. By evening, the board released a statement carefully worded, legally polished, commending decisive clinical judgment under extraordinary circumstances. No names, no admissions, but no punishments either. It wasn't justice, but it was close. As night fell again over Street Alden, Evelyn walked the corridor one last time before heading home. Nurses greeted her openly now. A resident thanked her quietly. A security guard held the door without being asked. She stopped outside Daniel Mercer's room. You did good, he said softly. So did you, she replied. For what it's worth, he added, they won't forget you. Evelyn allowed herself a small, tired smile. Neither will I. She left the hospital that night, not as a legend, not as a ghost, but as something far more dangerous to people who preferred silence. A witness who refused to disappear. The day Daniel Mercer was transferred out of intensive care, the hospital felt lighter. Not relieved lighter, as if a weight it hadn't known it was carrying had finally been set down. Sunlight poured through the atrium windows of Street Alden Medical Center, catching dust motes in the air and softening the edges of a place that had spent too many nights braced for catastrophe. Staff moved with renewed confidence. Conversations sounded normal again. Even the elevators seemed less reluctant to open. Dr. Evelyn Carter noticed all of it. She stood at the nurse's station reviewing charts with the same quiet focus she'd always had, but something had shifted around her. People no longer spoke about her in hushed tones. They spoke to her directly, respectfully. Not because of whispered legends or military titles, but because they had seen what happened when experience was ignored, and when it was finally trusted. Holbrook approached a familiar presence now rather than an uncertain one. They're moving him to step down, he said. Neurology cleared it. No new swelling. Evelyn nodded. Good. He hesitated. I wanted to tell you. The board finalized the review. She waited. No disciplinary action, he continued. They updated the trauma escalation policy. Seniority now factors experience, not just current role. A pause. They cited your case, without naming you. Evelyn allowed herself a faint knowing smile. That's how change usually survives. Holbrook studied her. You could have burned the place down. I didn't come here to do that, she said. Hospitals aren't the enemy. Fear is. They walked together toward Daniel's room. The door was open now, no guards, no suits lingering in the hallway. Just a man sitting upright in bed, thinner than before, but unmistakably alive. Daniel looked up when they entered. "I hear I'm being downgraded," he said dryly. "Guess I survived." Evelyn stepped closer, checking his vitals out of habit. "You did more than survive," she said. "You adapted." He met her eyes. "So did you." The general appeared moments later, no longer in uniform, just a man with lines on his face that spoke of long responsibility. He stopped at the doorway, deliberately, not intruding. "It's done," he said quietly. Daniel's expression sharpened. "All of it, as much as it ever is," the general replied. The transfer was halted. Names were passed up the chain. People are answering questions they can't deflect. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Good." The general turned to Evelyn. "And you?" She met his gaze calmly. "I'm staying." He nodded as if he'd expected no other answer. "Then this is goodbye. For now," she said. He paused. "They'll write about this someday." "They always do," she replied. "They'll get it wrong." He smiled faintly. "Probably." As he left, Daniel watched him go, then looked back at Evelyn. "They called you the ghost," he said. She didn't respond. "They said you saved people without ever letting anyone know how close it was," he continued. "That you disappeared before anyone could thank you." She finished adjusting a line and stepped back. "Stories like that make things simpler than they really are." Daniel nodded. "Still, I'm glad you didn't disappear this time." Evelyn met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "So am I." Later that afternoon, as Daniel was wheeled toward his new room, staff along the corridor paused, not dramatically, not ceremonially, but instinctively. A nurse offered a quiet smile. A resident gave a small nod. Someone murmured, "That's him. Not a hero, a survivor." Evelyn watched until he disappeared around the corner, then turned back to her work. There were charts to sign, consults to answer, a trauma case already forming in the ER. Life didn't wait for stories to end. As evening settled over the hospital, Holbrook found Evelyn in the staff lounge, pouring herself a cup of coffee she probably wouldn't finish. "I got accepted into the Advanced Trauma Fellowship," he said, trying to sound casual. She looked at him. "Congratulations." "They asked who inspired me to apply, and I told them the truth," he said, "that I watched someone I underestimated save a life when I couldn't." Evelyn studied him carefully, then nodded. "Don't make the same mistake twice." "I won't." She left shortly after walking out into the cool evening air. The city stretched before her, busy, indifferent, alive. Somewhere inside, the hospital alarms would sound again soon. Somewhere another life would balance on the edge of someone else's decision. Evelyn Carter walked to her car without looking back. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need titles. She didn't need ghosts. She needed hands that remembered what mattered when everything else failed. And inside, street, Alden Medical Center, long after the whispers faded and the investigations closed, something remained permanently changed. The next time someone said past her prime, they said it more carefully, because they had learned some legends don't announce themselves. They stand quietly in the light and do the work. Some people mistake silence for weakness and age for irrelevance. They assume that value fades once the spotlight moves on, that experience has an expiration date. But real mastery doesn't advertise itself. It waits. It watches. And when everything is on the line, it acts. True strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand credit or recognition. It shows up when it's needed most and stays focused on what matters, even when no one is watching. The world often overlooks those who carry the deepest scars because scars make us uncomfortable. Yet those scars are proof of survival, of lessons learned the hard way, of resilience forged under pressure. If there's one thing this story reminds us, it's this: never underestimate someone just because they move quietly, speak less, or don't fit your expectations. Wisdom doesn't fade with time, it sharpens. And respect once denied has a way of demanding to be earned back. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe that experience still matters in a world obsessed with speed, don't forget to subscribe.